It's like every day when you walk in.
I was going
Redwood
to
City, the city.
That's just the way it is every morning. Starts with my kids.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great idea. I should maybe have my kids tell them to come in and cheer in the morning. That would be much better than the crying and the screaming and the. Do you have kids? Do you have children?
I do.
How old are you?
They're
kids?
9 and 12.
Okay, well they're not hopefully crying.
Most days they're not crying.
Okay. Well, we're so excited to have you back
Thrilled to be here.
at Startup Grind. Tell us, let's just kind of go back to Canada for a minute. Tell us where you grew up and what kind of town did you grow up in? Tell us a little bit about your family.
Sure. So thrilled to be here. This is amazing. I live down the street in Burlingame and I walk by here, so I've never been in this facility, but it's awesome. So thank you to the hosts. I grew up in the raging metropolis of Goderich, Ontario, population 7,000, on the shores of Lake Huron, and also the mighty Maitland River. And it was a great upbringing, small town. I grew up in a family of 4 children, two parents, lots of pets. But my first startup was my family's business. So for the Canadians in the room, they'll know what Canadian Tire is. So my family owned a franchise of Canadian Tire. And that, for those who've never been inside a Canadian Tire, think of Pep Boys meets Sports Authority meets Home Depot meets Osh, smushed together in one roof. So we all worked on the floor of my parents' Canadian Tire store. And that was.
What does that mean, worked? Is that like slaved, or what does that mean?
Well, we weren't given a choice. That
Okay.
was true. So that was part of maybe the air quotes. Some of us worked harder than others. So my older brothers probably worked harder than myself and my sister. But if you think about it, all companies you're either building stuff or you're selling things, right? And this is true of any company.
Yeah.
I would build bikes and barbecues and wheelbarrows in my spare time, and then we would sell. And that was my first sales job. As I mentioned, we grew up on the water, so there's a lot of fishing in the town. So we had this enormous wall of these fishing lures. Any fishermen? There are fisher people in the room, so I hate fishing. Maybe, but we used to do fun contests with each other because we were kind of bored. We didn't really want to be working there. But the contest was like this. Like when you split things, so the person who splits it, the other person gets to choose. Well, we were inspired by that. We would have the person pick the most obscure fishing lure, and then the other person had to sell that lure. And at the end of the week, you'd tally up who sold the most fishing lures, and the winner was the one who sold the most fishing lures. So we became very creative with our storytelling about the sizes of the fish that chomped on this fuchsia-colored fishing lure that we had to dust off. But that was my first sales job. We had a lot of fun, a great close-knit family that's still tight together. But really growing up in a small town in Canada really gave me perspective, and I think really was a formative experience.
Working with family, this is like one of the cardinal rules. Like, do not in a startup, or like do not work with your family. You will hate each other by the end. You all still like each other. Was it ultimately a good experience being that close together over?
I think it was. It really brought our family close together. I learned the value of hard work. My parents, worked really hard every night. My memories of my father and my mother were like late at night. They were working at the kitchen table across from each other. There was no excuse but to work hard. The other thing is, I think everyone at some point should work in retail or as a server in a restaurant. You learn so much about human beings, right? You just learn about different attitudes and different approaches at work, and you learn respect is what you learn, but also how to connect and really serve and understand humans.
How do you with your kids today? How do you teach them to work hard? I assume you live here in Silicon Valley somewhere.
Yeah.
You're not running a retail store. I assume you don't have time for that.
No, not those days. Lemonade stands, maybe.
Yeah.
I worry about it, actually. If I'm really just straight up, it's the thing that I worry most about is raising children in an era of abundance in a place like Silicon Valley where there's so much amazing things. I mean, the opportunities that our kids get to have in this amazing place are phenomenal. So I wouldn't trade that for the world. But I also worry deeply about they do not understand, the value of real hard work. I mean, the other thing we used to do was hang out on my grandparents' farm, and that wasn't like riding horseback and eating bonbons. We were working. So I worry about that deeply, and I think it's a hard thing. I haven't figured out and cracked the code, but chores are a good place to start.
In the store, were you sort of scheming in your head, someday I want to be a CEO, I want to run a company? Like, was this a thought at that point, or did you have aspirations heading into college to do something different?
No, not at all. Actually, I looked at the opposite feeling at the time. I looked at how hard my parents worked, and I was like, I don't want to work that hard. I didn't aspire. Like this, the CEO thing is amazing. I'm so grateful for the company that I had the privilege of leading, an amazing team, and we can get into that. But no, it's a short answer. I was a very good hockey player, and I'm a little bit obnoxiously stereotypically Canadian. The Canadians worked at Canadian Tire. I was actually for a nanosecond I was on the board of something called Tim Hortons, which is very it's kind of obnoxious. But the reality is my parents had the wisdom to push us out of our comfort zone all the time, and I didn't understand the wisdom. In fact, I despised that often. But I was sent away to boarding school for my last few years of high school, and let me just put it this way: I didn't get in because of my grades or because of my academic prowess. It is because I was a skilled hockey player. So I went to a really good school in Toronto, and that was when I learned how to learn, because I was a terrible student, in fact. But that opened my eyes to the world outside of a small town, and then that eventually, I think I can trace that back to finding my way here, where you're woken up to just this wonderful world and a diverse world, a world where people dream big. That wouldn't have happened if my parents didn't push me, literally into the most painful few months of my life, where I had to learn how to learn for the first time.
Well, most of us here in the Bay Area, I feel like, are not native to the Bay Area. There certainly are some people, but more than not, people have come from outside the Bay Area. I grew up in Florida and Europe, and came here, for a job. How did you get here? What led you?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad in Canada. I had a suspicion. So actually, I went to undergrad because I was pleasing my parents. I basically they wanted me to go to a certain school and take a certain degree even. I went to that certain school. I applied to that degree program, got into that program, and decided, I thought all the people around me were.
What degree was it?
It was an undergraduate business program.
Okay.
The University of Western Ontario, an amazing program. I'm going to date myself, but you can remember Alex P. Keaton, like Family Ties. These are people who literally wore ties and were excited that classes started at 8. And they were way too serious, way too ahead of time. So I was like, hey, I'm not doing that. I'm having way too much fun. I didn't even have a degree. A major picked out. I had this program that I could just pick computer science or whatever. I just had various interests. So I went there to please my parents. I had an inkling I wanted to do graduate work at some point. I'd been applying to graduate schools. Dartmouth was my first choice. And now while I was waiting, I was doing consulting, and I'd never been to the Bay Area. I'd never been to California, for that matter. And I had an inkling I wanted to do it for a couple months while I was waiting to go to graduate school. I came here, and I still to this day can't put my finger on it, but I felt like things were happening here or about to happen here. So I fell in love with the Bay Area, fell in love with my now wife, and I've been here. That 2 months has turned into 18, 19 years. So that's of course then Google happened, and the rest has been history.
So you did consulting, and I hear sort of mixed things from different people. I've heard some people that sort of went into consulting that said, hey, that was a great experience. I got exposure to all these businesses, and I learned, saw mistakes and saw things work. And then you hear other people, when they go up and speak at Stanford, don't go to Bain, don't go do consulting. What was your experience? Was it ultimately with where you are today? Was it the right thing to do, or could there have been a better path?
A bit of both. So that program I applied to and got in, and then said no, thanks. It turns out that program's a huge talent magnet for consultants and bankers. So I remember I pissed off a lot of the people because I applied for those jobs and I had done, at that point, I had figured out the game of school. So I had good grades, even though I didn't work that hard at it. When I got all these interviews, but it was a thing to do at the time, to do banking or consulting. I remember I'd never been to New York City, final rounds at Goldman Sachs, literally 10 rounds of interviews. At the end, I was like, oh my gosh, these people are very strange or partially evil. And I was like, there's no interest at all to do this banking thing. So consulting by comparison looked relatively amazing. Like they're very kind humans for the most part, and we're investing in me. So I actually think it's a fantastic foundation. You basically learn how, first of all, how to solve a problem. Second of all, how to work with people. And then thirdly, you learn how to sell ideas, all of which are very useful things. Now, I learned how to be a good consultant. I actually was kind of terrible at the beginning. I remember actually almost getting fired in my first case because I just wasn't really that interested in the business at the time. But I do think it's useful to get foundation in those areas. But I think long term, you start to become ineffective at actually doing things, right? And the world's about doing things and making mistakes and learning, as opposed to sitting on a whiteboard or philosophizing. So I have a healthy disrespect for consulting, but also really, really trace back a lot of my foundation in business thinking and learning to those early days.
You moved here in 2005 to work at Google, and your sort of Google experience reads like this sort of corporate dream. Like
I couldn't keep a job?
No, it was, you kept getting a better job consistently, basically every 18 months. And I wonder just, we talk about different skills at different times and at different places, but what made you successful in an environment like that? Like, what skills did you have to have there that made you successful, say, now tens of thousands of people, I think they're closer to 100,000 now, and then we'll talk later about what makes you successful in a 300-person company, but what made you successful there at that time,
Yeah, I think it's adaptability and curiosity were really helpful. I have this expression I picked up along the way. It's like bloom where you're planted. And it was a chaotic time at Google, hyper growth, an amazing time to be like a once in a generation company. So the learning opportunities were just everywhere. So you had to kind of just figure out that and have curiosity. I think one of the things that, I remember the first time, about 18 months into my journey there, my boss went on a maternity leave, and they kind of looked around the room and said, well, like, who are you going to hand the keys to? And they kind of said, just don't screw it up, right? I guess we'll see it in 6 months. But that was a great opportunity. And it was really when I take that step to be a leader of leaders. That was the first time there. And what I learned was it's all about the team. So a lot of the attention that is paid at places like Google to team and culture were something I learned very early on. And that cultures are always evolving. They're always dynamic. And you either know that and embrace it, or you're it's like the adage at poker, right? There's a sucker at every table. If you don't know who it is, it's usually you, right? If you don't understand that cultures need to evolve all the time, then you're really going to be behind. So I learned that at Google. Was really fortunate to have incredible mentors along the way. The person who hired me was actually Tim Armstrong, who is just one of the most charismatic leaders you'll ever find. And I had a lot of people believe in me and giving me a lot of constructive feedback and chances to fail along the way.
So you have this great run at Google, 10 years, and then you could probably do anything, and you decide to go to Evernote, which is this, so just for people that don't know, tell us what is Evernote to begin with, and then we can talk about that. What is Evernote?
Sure. So Evernote is a place that's like an extension of your brain. All right, so the original founding vision for the company was to essentially augment your brain. And Stepan, our visionary founder, it really saw ahead of most people that human evolution was simply not keeping up with technology, and that your brain's a terrible place to keep ideas. So you need a place to have a digital extension of that brain. So at a more functional level, it's a place to capture ideas and thoughts anywhere, anytime, any format, and then retrieve them in the moments that matter. So that's what Evernote is. It's cross-platform. It's in every country in the world. 220 million registered users and growing. A thriving community that really has a deep emotional connection to our product and our brand. And we're really, as I said earlier, grateful to be in this chair. But to your question about that decision, I think it might go back to an understanding of me. I'm an impatient, lifelong learner. I know that I learn when I'm not comfortable. I still resist it. It's a human instinct to not want to go into things that make you uncomfortable, but I know in my heart of hearts that that's when true learning happens. And at coming up on the 10-year mark at Google, I was feeling comfortable. And it's a comfortable place to be. That's when I knew that I had to go find my next challenge. Enter Evernote, a product I've used since 2010, a mission that I think is meaningful and more relevant today than ever, a wonderful, rich history, and I saw in it huge potential, a lot of untapped potential. That's what I loved. And 2 years plus in, I couldn't imagine where we are. And I'm so thrilled with the progress we're making. We're in many ways just getting started.
Evernote's a really interesting company because it sort of comes out and just kind of explodes. It feels like everyone is using it, everyone's talking about it. Really forward-thinking design and experience, and just this really thoughtful mission, and then it kind of like externally, it kind of feels like, this is before you got there, it felt like something sort of happened there where either a shift into profitability or just something changed, something sort of changed with the product or the company, and then you kind of come in 2.5 years ago, and you kind of have to make some really tough decisions in some circumstances of just trying to, sounds like, get things in a certain track or back on track or refocus, or can you talk a little bit about sort of as you came into this situation and sort of fresh eyes on everything, what you saw is like, what are the first things you needed to do to get in there to have an impact and to kind of steer things in the next direction?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a step back first, and then I'll get to those the observations and the progress that we have in our making. The formula for success in a startup is, in my mind, something like idea and mission times team times execution times a random number between 1 and 10,000. And Evernote had all those things and rode and continues to ride so many mega waves, right? So I don't have these in order, but if you think about the cloud, like when Evernote was started, we didn't call it the cloud. It was just the original vision that if you wanted to capture anything and anywhere and then retrieve it later, well, of course you'd put that in the cloud. That's the magic. The iPhone changed everything. It's really, really hard to think, for my mind anyways, to think that 10 years ago, the iPhone didn't exist, or 10 plus years. It's amazing, it's astounding. And like 9 years ago, the App Store didn't exist. So Evernote had the good fortune and the insight to basically place an enormous bet, a transformative bet on the iPhone, one of the very first apps in the App Store, built tight partnerships with Apple. Right? That relationship has served Evernote incredibly well. I think it's very fair to say that the company would not be where it is without that deep partnership that lasts today with Apple. So you have a wave of the app, like all of a sudden, low-cost distribution all over the world. Like these things, like wave after wave after wave, have served us well, mixed with some serendipity and then some really wise investments. So that's kind of what got us here, and I think it starts in our case with the profound nature and the insight of Stepan when he had this insight, and the fact that problem has only grown. We're serving a very universal human need, this need to feel in control, this need to remove a sense of being overwhelmed. Right? We are losing the battle in a massive way to information. It used to be information would double every decade. Information is doubling virtually every day, and with IoT and sensors on everything that can be censored, that will probably move to every hour. Our brains cannot keep up. So that's kind of the backdrop for bursting on the scene, catching lightning in a bottle. And I give the people who came before me so much credit, and that's why I have such deep sense of gratitude that this is special. And we created essentially a category, whatever you want to call it, cross-platform digital personal productivity. I don't really care about the words, but the reality is we did create a category. We had lots of imitators along the way, but to your point earlier, there's something special about the design and the attention to detail in the product that's hard to replicate, and great products have this. But that said, to your point, you have to keep moving forward and pushing as a leader, or else people catch up, right? Even the big players will catch up. Apple Notes used to stink. It's actually quite a good product. I don't recommend it, but it is a good product versus where it was before. Google has tried many times, and then dozens and dozens of applications have drawn inspiration from Evernote. Things like OneNote, for example. So there's lots of, if we wanted to just stay static, that's the way the world works. People will catch up. At the same time, I think emboldened by our success, we placed lots of different bets. So things like, oh gosh, we're gonna go into physical goods. We're gonna be a chat company. These came from great places. It came from an entrepreneurial streak, a risk-taking streak to say, hey, productivity is much more than just this. We need to push the envelope. Now, in my estimation, to your question about the things I observed when I came in, first thing I did was not do anything, actually, but listen. I've learned that the hard way in my career. I'm an impatient human being. I have a bias to action, and that's generally a great thing, except for when you're coming into a new situation. You have to understand that things happen for a reason. You have to understand that. So I said to the board, and I said to the company, in fact, I said, for 45 days, I'm not going to do anything, but listen. And I want to hear from every person who cares.
You told them that coming in, not after you got there, right? They're like, you got to do this, and you're like, I'm not going to do anything for 45 days. No, you said that was coming in.
Yeah. It's funny. I got this advice from a very amazing engineer at Google who gave that advice when we take a new role. Is don't do anything. Just don't do it. Listen, observe. So I did that, and what was really clear was a couple things. One was everyone was there for a reason, and it really traced its way back to the power of the founding idea. Everyone had different words to describe it, but really that's why people were getting out of bed in the morning. And we'd done a lot of things at the time that were distractions from that. So, for example, the physical market, we called it, is a complicated business. I know firsthand. I've been in retail. It's a hard business. Software is a hard business. E-commerce is a really hard business. Pick one. And I like the SaaS business better than the physical goods. So we made that choice. And as a result, there's a really difficult decision to let some people go. There are a lot of really talented human beings doing amazing work. It just happened that we weren't going to do that work anymore. So that was a really tough decision. We did it very forthrightly, and we're very human about it. And I'm always proud of how the team went about that. Very difficult and emotional decision. But it was really, the other aspect of it was we were burning more cash than I thought was healthy. Our runway was less than 2 years, and I didn't like that. I wanted to be in a position where we controlled our own destiny. This was in 2000, this was like 2.5 years ago. The late stage funding markets were getting really hostile. I didn't want to put ourselves at the mercy of that. So I wanted to buy us time and space to position ourselves and control our own destiny and prioritize growth, and that's in fact what we've done. So the good news is we've now accelerated our growth, both top line. We're a cash flow positive company. We control our own destiny. We are now investing aggressively in the team and our technology and our infrastructure and our product roadmap, and I couldn't be more excited about what's to come. So it's been no shortage of challenges, but it's against a backdrop of a company with vast potential and as relevant today, if not more relevant today than when the company was started.
I think it's incredible, honestly, and I've just, over the last few weeks, been reading and watching a lot of the different things that you've been doing, and have sort of seen them before we knew we were going to do this, and it really is incredible to me that you were able to take the company from the mindset that it had to the one that you just described of saying, hey, we've had great venture capital funding. I hope our customers fund us for the rest of the time, And that is such a huge shift on so many different levels. I can just imagine, getting people kind of sold on that mission. It's a great mission, but still they're kind of on this, and then you're kind of, well, let's go this way and do this. How did you come in and keep the team and get the highest performing people excited about this sort of new strategy or change in strategy? How did you, with the turmoil at the time, how did you get people to really get excited about what they were doing, when, it feels to me like it totally worked, but in that moment, 2.5 years ago, I mean, what a daunting task. So how did you and the team do that?
Well, it was a daunting task, and it is a daunting task, and a lot of people weren't up for it, and we had to say goodbye, or they said goodbye, and it's never easy. It's really, really hard. In terms of how I address it, is like a pretty forthright and transparent person. I really was just laying it out as best I could, and say this is the way I see the world, and this is the decision we're going to take. I articulated as much of a vision and a strategy as I could at the time. I was also transparent to say there's, some of these things are pretty broad brushstrokes. I mean, we're going to have to come back and really refine some of these things. We talked about 3 or 4 of those bets, and we've been consistent with those. We've refined and really proven or disproven some of those ideas along the way. But some of the teams here, and they can attest, it's like, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. Being open, honest about mistakes that are made, and also that there's different stages of companies, and different people thrive at different stages, and that's okay. It doesn't make one better or worse. It just is. I think certain people love the early stage, grinding away for product market fit. Those eating ramen noodles and bonding in a very in over.
Nobody likes the ramen, but yeah.
you know what I mean. And others really are fascinated with how do you take something that is working and scale it. And it's rare that those are often the exact same people. I love to build and scale up things. That's what I love. I love challenges. So being open and honest with people about that was the way through. And we didn't get it right. I'll be the first to admit it. We made mistakes with some hires. We made mistakes along the way. But again, just owning those mistakes, being a human being, and admitting them. That's the only way I know how to do it.
Well, I feel like, and we're taking questions at slido.com, #StartupGrind. If you've got some questions, and we'll put these in. You're clearly an incredibly talented leader. You're very humble too. I mean, I can see why, like, from the outside looking in, honestly, this is like, sort of feels like the third wave of Evernote, what's been happening over the last 12 to 18 months. And I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about what does the future look like? Like, what, where is it now going? What is the product? Where is it going? Where's the community going? How are you guys evolving with what the future is?
Yeah, so we'll touch on the community because it really is where things began and are at the heart of everything we do. It's interesting. Some people are like, "Oh, community's so vogue and it's all the new rage," and I'm like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way." But it is.
It's just a part of who you guys are.
It is, and it's the future too.
Yeah.
So really, let's start there. I can talk a little bit about some of the things we're betting on Not as though those waves we're going to keep riding those waves, but there's new ones coming, and we need to position ourselves to be able to ride those and really drive the next wave and the next agenda for this category. But the community, let's start there. We mentioned, I think what's happening in the world today is fascinating. We live in the most interesting times ever. I'm unapologetic about that. But there's some nuance that matters. I think especially digital natives and younger generations have a very low regard for institutions, historically low, if you look at the measurements, and a deep desire to connect to something bigger than themselves. Self-express, crave authenticity and transparency, right? And that, by one definition, is what communities offer. And in many ways, that's what we offer, right? And growing up in literally a tiny town, I think I'm reminded that the world today, where you can't hide, is kind of like living in a small town in Canada. Like, everyone knows their own business, and I think that's actually good for those who can embrace it and who are proud of what they stand for. We are very proud of what we stand for. Our community is our sales force, right? 220 million people. We don't have a sales force to speak of, right? It's our community. Our community serves as our product development arm. We test everything with them. They're very vocal through forums, through meetups like in rooms like this all over the world. They provide us feedback, and that's the first place we go when we're rolling out a feature or a product. In some remote regions of the world, there are customer support. They speak a different language, and they're willing to do that. So much so that people, when they describe Evernote, they don't talk about it like most other products and companies. They say it's my Evernote. There's an emotional bond that we think is traced to our community. And we invest very aggressively in that. We have a very formalized program called our Evernote Certified Consultants, and these are people who take an exam, like an exam that is really hard. Like, you just wouldn't wake up one day and pass it. You have to have deep product knowledge. And we have about 7,000 and growing. And these are people that have brought Evernote into their lives because it's a tool that they recommend to people, or they're just passionate for one reason or another. So the community, it's safe to say the community is everything for us. We're allowed to have the organic growth that you'd mentioned earlier because of them. We have roughly 60 to 80,000 registrations every day. We don't pay for those. That's through word of mouth. It's kind of astounding. So community is huge. I'll pause there, but I want to shift to the waves that we will ride. I fundamentally believe that Evernote has the potential to be one of the most meaningful AI-powered companies on the planet. And why do I say that? Well, if you think about the notion of augmenting the brain, like Stepan was using words that were artificial intelligence back then, way ahead of its time. The handwriting recognition in our product is math, it's machine learning. Artificial intelligence is going to be a function of signal and data that matters, mixed with technology that's tuned to serve a greater purpose, and that is making our users more successful and productive, or automating the things that are automated or mundane. I see a happy marriage where, just like Amazon has compressed shopping and made it delightful, we can do the same thing for people's workflows. Stuff they'd just rather not do. I think we can do that. So we're betting very aggressively in that area. Another area is continued rise of knowledge workers. Like, the world economy is shifting from people who use their hands and their bodies to more of using their minds for a living. That's a trend that I think will persist for a very, very long time. As a consequence of that, but also, I think the expansion of choice has made people really picky. They want services and products and software that doesn't suck. That really, really delights them. Ideally, that means it's a personalized experience for them. That is profound. And when they're going into the workplace, as one example, it used to be there were gatekeepers that told you what to use. Here's your Windows machine with Windows stuff. That role of a gatekeeper is waning. This is true in Hollywood, it's true in retail, it's true in politics, it's true in news. Everywhere you go, people used to say all news fit to print. is now being replaced by choice and users actually pulling things that they want into their life. So these are trends that we're betting on, and we're listening to our users who are saying to us by their actions that they want to use Evernote in a more professional context and a personal context. It's not or, it's and. So we're looking at ways to make that more delightful in a professional context and making the product even more powerful when they choose to use it with more than one person. These are the areas that we're betting on.
Something that people say about you, and you can hear it in this talk, but is that you're a great listener and that you're constantly trying to get feedback. And I wonder, you've got entrepreneurs maybe in the room watching this, listening to this, who are probably saying, I've got this vision for this thing, I've got to make this happen. And they've already closed themselves off to some feedback. You're the CEO of this multi-100 million user company and hundreds of employees. How have you kept that door open in spite of all the times in this, from where you're sitting right now? You could very easily say, do this, but you're still like totally open to feedback and trying to improve. What things have you done to be like that? How have you honed that skill?
I don't even know any other way, actually. I don't even know if it's from sports or just being a really bad student. I have to embrace like life hacks and feedback to get better, and it I don't know. It's maybe bred in a very competitive family where you got better by getting feedback. There's no other way you get better. So I have the privilege of working with Kim Scott, and she's radical candor. And it's all about like, listen, I don't have this figured out at all. And the moment I do, then like whatever, I'll have other problems. But if you're not open to feedback, like you're capping your potential as a company and as a product and as a human being. So it doesn't even register to me. I carry a bunch of devices around. I try to file more bugs than anyone in the company. I think that's a job of a CEO. That drive people crazy, I'm sure, for not just that reason.
How many bugs do you file a week or a month?
It ebbs and flows, but I would say on order of 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Bet they get fixed fast.
I wish they would get fixed faster. No, but I think that like don't drink your own bathwater, right? Like whatever, right? Like that's part of the. If I, Canada has this expression, in Australia has it too. It's called the tallest poppy, right? Which actually has don't be the tallest poppy. The tallest poppy gets cut down, right?
Okay.
You want to stand out, and if you do, you get too big for your britches. Like literally in a small town, you know what happens? Like someone literally causes you physical harm. So I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it too. But that makes you maybe a good fighter, actually, so maybe not.
Which made you good at hockey.
Yes. It was helpful in hockey.
Do you still play hockey? There's a rink. There's like a...
I know. I have not rejoined a league since I moved back from Canada. So when I was in Canada, I was a block away from my high school, and I played in a Wednesday night league, and it was amazing. Haven't rejoined here yet.
Okay, you're busy. You got stuff on your plate. How should a young startup think about pricing their product? How would you if you are an investor, you advise a lot of companies. How do I figure out what in the world do I charge for this thing?
A lot of experimentation is the short answer. I think that pricing is probably one of the most consistently made errors that startups make. They don't charge enough. Gross margin is one of the key indicators of the success of any company. I saw a tweet this morning that made me laugh. I think I knew what they were saying. They said, gross margin is the biggest indicator of company culture. I thought that was interesting. But more profound to me is you can't be afraid to charge for your product. You don't charge for your product, you can't fund it, you can't invest in your team, you can't invest in marketing. So often people try and maybe are a little too generous with giving it away or discounting it. So that's just a common mistake I see.
And so and I've made that mistake many times, either giving it away for free or charging too little. How do I get the right price? Because in the beginning, I have no customers, so I'm desperate for anything, anything where the check cashes. So how do I push that boundary without, do I just try a different price every time until you find the right balance, or what do you do?
No, it's not like just shooting in the dark. There are tools, right? So there's I did pay attention in econometrics. There are very conjoint analysis. There's all these sets of tools and usually have really long names associated with. There's very learnable techniques that you can use to test by basically surveying and sampling. So you don't need to constantly raise and lower prices, because that gets fatiguing. You won't get a good signal. You can do a whole bunch of quantitative research to get to those answers. But typically, people tend to err on the side of not charging enough, and then therefore they can't invest.
Talk to us about being an investor. One of the things that is totally unique to you that I've never ever heard, and I've talked to lots of investors.
Yeah.
You exclusively invest in Canadian entrepreneurs. Is that right? Do I understand that right? Or you just most of the time? Is it exclusive?
Well, listen, I'm not I am an angel investor. I haven't been doing it since I started Evernote. I've been too busy with time constraints. But yeah, to me, when I talk about the power of people and team, I really mean that. My investments are all about people, because I have a thesis that resourceful, scrappy people find ways. And the place where you enter the journey is very, very, I've never seen it be the same place you exit. So you need scrappy, resourceful people who can find their way through the maze. So yes, I think I've made 6 or 7 angel investments. They've all been in Canada. And it's not some charity, although it really is an information advantage. It's a network advantage to me. I just know a lot of people in Canada, so I get to interact with so many amazing entrepreneurs. So I just have an advantage. In the time when I was back in Canada, there was there still is amazing talent, just incredible talent. There was a dearth of capital and a dearth of this type of stuff, mentoring and giving back. So I had an advantage that I wanted to give back. So when I made those angel investments, I instantly mentally wrote it down to 0. It wasn't about return, though that of course helps. It was about giving back. And Canada has given me everything. So I feel the need to pay it forward and really do this sort of stuff, but at a more micro level for startups. And that's really what it's about for me.
What's missing in Canada? What do they need more of right now?
A couple things. I think the capital is now flowing, so the government has actually been very, very good. I actually give Trudeau a lot of credit. He has listened to the community. Doesn't always get it right, but he's listening. So they've changed some laws that allowed venture capital money to flow in more readily. That's been huge. So capital is abundant now, which is great. The other thing is immigration. Canada is a country of immigration. 22% of Canadians are born in another country. That is an amazing source of strength for Canada. This notion of inclusion and diversity comes very naturally to Canada. I've been one that basically am super encouraged to see Canada leaning into immigration at a time when this country is fumbling its way through, to say it nicely. That is helpful. And then that stuff like this, Startup Grind, you said there's 5 or 6 chapters up in Canada. That's amazing. There's a formation of a community. Canada's having a moment around AI, right? Three of the top 10 people in the AI in the AI world on the planet are from the University of Toronto or McGill. So Canada's surging on startups in and around that, and I think it's amazing to see. So it has all the right ingredients now, and I think the other piece is really going that extra mile. I'll tell you a story about the Olympics in Vancouver. It was a breakthrough moment for Canada. Canadians often like to be third. And
There's a lot of honor in it, or what?
I don't know. I struggled with it growing up because I'm, as I said, a very competitive person. But it's like, can we just all get along, and can we all get trophies? And someone wise said, no, for this Olympics, we're going to own the podium. Right? And there was an uproar. Own the podium? What do you mean own the podium? and it wasn't just like an expression or slogan. It's like, no, we're going to fund people that we think can win a gold medal, and no suit for you. And guess what? Guess what happened?
You won some gold medals.
More gold medals than ever in the history of the country. Ever by a landslide. Wasn't even close. That mentality is in short supply in Canada, and that's changing, and I love it. The other thing is there is a dearth of talent in key roles that prevent companies from going from being like a couple $100 million to like $1 billion. And I was the bad guy that took advantage of this when I was in Canada. We couldn't find product talent, so what did we do? We just hired. We just said, yeah, we'll buy you at $10, $20 million. They were happy, but the other part of me felt bad because some of those companies I think should have had the right to become billion-dollar companies. Look at Shopify and what they're doing in Ottawa. Amazing company. So all the ingredients are there. Canada's having its moment. I think the immigration part is huge. The capital will find great ideas. Ultimately, great talent is thriving and will continue to thrive in Canada and elsewhere as well.
Yeah, and I think some of the best engineers come out of the Waterloo, Toronto area, and there's just this incredible. I mean, they're probably come out of anywhere, but specifically that region, you've got some really incredible hard tech, people that are consistently coming out of there through the education system. So
yeah, I have a bone to pick with Sam Altman because he did that interview with New York Times, and it was actually quite a funny interaction, especially here in the Valley. It was like the interviewer was asking Sam Altman the question. Sam Altman's the person who runs YC. I'm sure you guys know that, but it was, what university produces the best applicants to YC? And it was, the interviewer was expecting the answer to be Stanford, and Sam said University of Waterloo. And it's true, they've admitted some ungodly amount of applicants from Waterloo, and it's kind of screwed it up for us that used to know that as a great place to go get talent.
Yeah.
It hasn't been a very well kept secret for a long time, but it is an amazing place that produces some of the world's best engineers and computer science grads.
I think going back to the goal that Canada set and won more gold medals. This is something you've talked about establishing your North Star and defining success and then writing it down, or it's just not going to happen. And you've seemed to very clearly articulate that, and we've heard that here, but anybody that's followed your company has seen you very clearly sort of articulate the strategy, the vision. You talk about it every time I've heard you talk. Every press release, it's reinforcing those same ideas, that same North Star of where you're going. How a startup who is just starting, who in reality thinks they know where the North Star is, but doesn't really know because they don't have enough feedback yet. Yeah. So how do you, when you're just getting started, how do you set that North Star and have enough wiggle room to still find a new North Star if you need to?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question, and you're being very kind and gracious because I think you can.
I got more Canadian in me, so
you can never get that really right, and we're constantly evolving at Evernote to really evolve our story but stay true to that true north. But to your question about how, often I see people when they describe their vision, their dream, their true north. That's the thing that shouldn't change in the fullness of time very much, if at all. But in the early days, it has to by definition. What I often see is people describing a product, right? My advice in articulating a vision is to describe a world in a much better state. Don't describe your product. Describe, we talk about augment human productivity, right? It's wow, there's this problem in the world. We're inundated with more information than we've ever had before. So therefore, the vision is a world where our brains need help and augment. So that's the rough parameters of what we're wrestling with in our true north. But get out and talk to people, right? And be provocative in the expression of that. Think of some of the best visions like no software, Salesforce.com, right? Short, sweet. There's a visual that went around with it as well. But the only way you'll do that is by getting out and talking to people and getting feedback, and not having your ego attached to the feedback that you get. So audacious, really describe a world that's fundamentally better than it is today. That's your dream that you're aspiring to. You may never get there, but it's that true north that you can look up when the winds buffet you and take you off track. You can look up, just like the sailors used to do in the North Star days. That's the reference to the North Star. That's what it's about. But you don't just wake up and have it one day. You have to refine it. In fact, ours was written in Russian, and it translated very poorly. It was rough
Because the founders Russian.
Because Jeff was Russian, and it was. Computers have evolved to the point as to make people not stupid anymore. Like it was like that was it. Like literally in one of the investor presentations. That was the original. So my point is, there was profoundness in there, but the words matter. So you need to constantly tell the story and refine it and get feedback in real time.
We're going to go to questions here, but I just want to finish with. You wrote a post earlier this year about standing up for what's right as this immigration debate has sort of unfolded, or it's not even a debate that has unrolled. The immigration reforms or changes or pullbacks that have come across the states. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience being a Canadian coming to the United States, which we've been talking about, but how, as you've seen some of that, what have been your thoughts and sort of, it's been 9 or 10 months since you've seen that. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that.
I shared my perspectives on Canada and why I think Canada has a natural advantage here. This is a country, this is an industry that just simply wouldn't exist without immigrants and diversity, period. So I was deeply disturbed. In fact, I remember my family was at a bat mitzvah that night when that ban was passed, and I was so disturbed, and I literally we were driving back home, and I said, no, I have to go to the airport. I have to go do this, and my kids were in the car with me, and they're like, "Has Daddy lost his mind?" I'm like, no. In fact, no. This is important, and if it wasn't so late, I'd bring you guys all with me to see this. So I was viscerally moved in a way that is unusual, because I'm an immigrant, and if I were from a different country or I was different somehow, I wouldn't be here. So I just really felt disturbed by it, and I felt the need to stand up and be there. And it was just a beautiful moment, being there and just observing the beauty of democracy, people peacefully protesting something that is just so important to them. And so I don't know. I was just really bothered, and there's an emotional side to it, but there's also just a very pragmatic side that it's really, really problematic. And it cuts into the schools as well. So like Stanford right now is like the professors, like the percentage of professors who are, it's a real problem for innovation. It's a real problem for progress in society. So I don't know, I was hesitant to do it a little bit, but I also think that I drew some inspiration from the founder of Chobani yogurt. That guy's amazing. I had a privilege to meet him last week.
From Turkey?
Yeah, from Turkey, and he's like, no, you have an obligation. You're bored. You have to take a stand. And I agree. You do. You have to be responsible about it and know that you have very diverse opinions in your community, but there's a way to articulate and authentically express how you feel, take a stand. And I think that comes back to the community. Like, you have to understand that you have to represent something bigger than who you are as a human being and have a connection to that, and the community is a place for that.
I think too I've lived 8 years of my life outside the United States, and you have users all over the world. We have users or chapters in 120 countries. So I think when you sort of get out of your own situation in wherever you are, and you think about all of these people, and you start to know some of these people. Like Eric Schmidt this week said that he hoped that he could get all the engineers from Iran to work at Google because they're so smart and they're so talented, and we have had chapters in some of these countries, and I have some friends in some of these countries, and these are some of the smartest, most talented people you'll ever meet.
I have a story about that, actually, so you reminded me. My dear friend Steve Woods, who runs engineering actually at Kitchener-Waterloo, I reached out to him around this stuff, and he said, Google, there were 127 applications like the day after in the election from people here wanting to transfer to Canada. And like they were real, and I think about half those eventually did proceed. But the story is about Iran. He goes, there are 35 Iranian engineers in Kitchener-Waterloo, and it might be inspired what Eric was talking about, because Steve's like, these are the most amazing engineers that we've ever seen, and they just showed up overnight because they wanted to escape the United States. They wanted to be in a place where they felt welcome. And I don't know what the number is right now, but I guarantee it's bigger than 35 in this relatively small town in Canada. And it's amazing. I love that story. And good for Google for really embracing that.
Chris O'Neill for Evernote, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for being here. We're going to do a couple of questions here with Slido. The first is, do you have an enterprise sales team, and how important is B2B for Evernote, and how do you integrate it into the B2C spirit of the company?
Yeah, no, we do not have an enterprise sales team. We're looking to add more of a, like it's probably more like midwifing a sale process than it is enterprise sale, meaning companies want to bring it in. How do we run it through contracts and legal and set people out? But really, my earlier comment is the numbers are roughly 70% of the uses of Evernote are in a professional and personal context. And that's increasing over time. So we have to pay attention to that and lean into it. But the way we think about it is actually, we admire Atlassian, and we admire a lot of companies. But the Atlassian...
They don't have an enterprise sales team either.
Right, so it's basically a bottoms-up motion where people are using our product in a professional context. We need to educate them and provide more value so that the product becomes more powerful in that professional context, and even more powerful when you use it with more than one person. And then our hope is we talk about inspiring productivity heroes in the workplace. So they're using it already, so they're aware of us, but they're not yet aware of the power of using Evernote in the workplace. So that's kind of the motion, that's what we're up to.
How hard was it to push for users to start paying without losing them?
It was noisy and hard inside the building. We had long debates, and I wasn't a very popular person, probably in some quarters still not, but it was important. One of the first things in that 45-day listening phase was I went to focus groups all weekend, and it was a mix of paid users and non-paid users. And one of the striking observations, two massive takeaways. One was no one, even though we could see their usage, no one, not one of the whole weekend felt that they were a power user. And I was so intrigued by that. No one felt that they were a power user of the product. Secondly, so less than 5% of people could articulate why they paid for our product. The power user thing said, we've made a product that feels overwhelming even to people who are super sophisticated and savvy. That's a problem. We need to strip down the product to make it less bloated and more bite-sized or more manageable.
Consumable, yeah.
Yeah. The paid stuff was like, there's good in that, right? People gave us money because they love us. I had this conversation with the company. I said, that's good. The bad is, that's not a business, that's a nonprofit, right? When someone loves you and gives you money but doesn't really know why, that's called a nonprofit. And some people in the company were like, well, cool, maybe we're gonna be a nonprofit. And I said, well, okay, let's play that out a little bit. You're gonna see my mug on a banner at the end of the year, or we're gonna do a pledge drive like twice a year and annoy the shit out of our users. I'm only joking with that stuff, but no, so we we wanted to change that. We wanted people to be clear about that. So we did a lot of the pricing work that I was referring to before, and people were really upset because they felt like we were, I don't know, doing something bad. But the reality was, it was probably one of the best decisions we made because we're clear now and we're investing in making the differences known. We maintain and will always maintain a free tier, and the vast majority of our users use that happily, and that's great. But we have a sense as to why we create value in their life, and then we align the value capture or the price or the premium aspect of our product with that, and it's gone very well. So we've really, really enjoyed the fruits of that.
Well, you're profitable, so yeah, cash flow positive. When can we expect to see AI features in Evernote?
Well, you have features in the product today. So a lot of the things are invisible. Search is an example, right? So search is powered by context. We have that. So more machine learning example is handwriting recognition. So this was a company, I'm not sure if anyone knows this, the original founding team of Evernote was behind the Newton. Does anyone, show of hands, know what the Newton is? Right? Yeah. So they were the software arm of the Newton. Because Newton was like the handwriting thing, like 20, 30 years ahead of its time. So handwriting recognition is a machine learning problem. They didn't used to call it that, but that's one thing that blows people's minds when we demonstrate this, even to this day. Take a picture of a whiteboard. If someone's handwriting is at all legible, you can then search it afterwards, and it's amazing. So there's those sorts of things. But really what we're trying to do with permission of our users is to figure out context at any one point in time so that we can provide that context for retrieval or for other actions that the user wants to take. So for example, maybe it's a meeting note and they want to be prompted for actions that were taken in those meetings. That's an example of something we're experimenting with.
When you went to the new model, I have to assume you experienced some sort of drop.
Yeah.
And I wonder how long did it take to sort of prove that was the right thing to do? Was it something where you guys had to kind of stick to your guns for a little bit and write it out? Is it something that pretty soon it was, or immediately it was obvious, even though maybe things slowed a little bit in this area, it's increasing in this area, so it's worth it? How quickly or how long did you have to wait to sort of figure out if you'd made the right decision?
Yeah, it took a lot of courage, especially in the first couple of days. The lead is here, she runs our social, and she was like, what have you done to me? I got a lot of hate for that.
Personally?
Yeah. It was not fun. But we knew relatively quickly, so we provided grace periods and so forth, but we knew that people were, the noise wasn't as loud as the actions. And the actions we were wrong in both directions. So people were more willing to pay than we'd expected, and the fall off of people was less, by about half. But the real test has been a year 18 months now on, and we haven't, like the cohorts and the lifetime values, all the things you look at in the SaaS business, like you obsess on, have actually gotten stronger, which is interesting. So we've raised prices and made our business model clear, and yet people are more valuable. Conversion rates are higher. Lifetime value is higher, retention's higher. I think part of me thinks that people inherently value Evernote. They value what we do in the world, and they actually like that we're clear. They might not like that they have to pay, and they didn't maybe have to in the past in certain situations. But I think they're looking. This is something that's important in my life, and whether it's $5 a month or $70 a year, it's worth it to me.
One more round of applause for Chris. Thank you so much for being here.